decision that ever got you to this point.
So attendees are coming in now, just to let you know, and we're going to start recording.
Okay, I'm going to stop my video and audio since we're not talking first.
All right, welcome attendees. Thank you for joining us today. I am Dr. Brianna Beaupre. I'm an assistant professor at Wichita State, and I'm also a board member for CrimCon. And so I am your stream host for today. Thank you for coming. We're super excited for this first ever virtual conference. We've had over 300 presentation submissions, and they've all been fantastic so far. So just a little information for you, for those of you watching. We are going to go in the order of the conference program. Each presenter will have 10 minutes, and you're welcome to ask questions in the Q&A. So that is located at the bottom for you to ask questions throughout, but I will ask the questions verbally to panelists at the end, and that's when they will answer them. And just remember to have fun. So CrimCon was meant to be something different, something more accessible and inclusive. So we're super excited about this. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first panelist. And this panel is entitled Domestic Violence, Perpetration, Victimization, and COVID-19.
Right. I think I'm up first. Is that correct? Oh, is that correct? Let me just, yeah, let's go for it. Okay. I'm just going to keep a, hope this technology is going to work for you now. Right, excellent. So hi, my name is Ruth Weir. I'm a lecturer at the University of Essex in the UK. And I'm going to talk to you today about my research on individuals, families and neighbourhoods, predictors of domestic abuse. So a bit of background, before I was, this is my PhD research, before I did my research, I worked for Essex County Council. Essex is a county east of London and has a resident population of about 1.9 million people. I was working on a multi-agency domestic abuse research project. And it was while I was working on that I realised that most of the domestic abuse services were commissioned using police data. But we know that police data is we know that only like 21% of victims are thought to report their abuse to the police. This therefore left me with quite a few questions about the other 79% of people. So I came up with 3 key research questions. The first 2 are more policy related questions. So they were, where should Essex County Council focus their resources and services to have the most impact in reducing domestic abuse? The second question is, can Essex County Council rely on Essex Police recorded crime data to predict the services requirements of those who do not report their abuse to the police? My final question is more of an academic question, which is, are individual or neighbourhoods variables a better predictor of domestic abuse? And I found this model, which is an ecological model of the predictors of domestic abuse. And it shows here that you've got that domestic abuse operates over different levels. So at the individual level, you've got things like individual attitudes, behaviours, health, social history. And then each individual is nested within interpersonal relationships and families. So you've got different types of family relationships, patriarchal culture, the role of women, whether there's alcohol, drug use, poverty, employment. And then the individuals and the families are nested within a neighbourhood or a community. And here, what's a neighbourhood environment like? Is there a culture of violence? Is there what is the access to services like? The quality of housing, drug use? Is there social isolation? And to really understand the final level, which is the policy systems of society, you really need to, and to be able to challenge that level, you really need to have a good understanding of the bottom 3 levels. So my research set out to look at all of those levels. But today, my research, I'm going to talk to you about the neighbourhood level, because this is the bit which was the most, which had the fewest number of publications on it. Very little work had been done in Europe on this, a bit more in the US. I couldn't find any other studies in the UK. So what I wanted to look at was, what can we learn about factors that might impact the level of domestic abuse in an area, so at that neighbourhood level? And I'm actually a geographer. Well, my first degree was geography. So I wanted to bring in Tobler's theory, which is that everything is related to everything else, but near things are more related than distant things. And I've combined that with the revised social disorganisation theory that Sampson and Groves used. So without going into masses of details about the model, because we don't have time today, I tested a number of different predictors, but my final model with the best fit found that the best in this model, 82% of the variability in the data set could be explained by 4 variables. And this, what I was looking at was the rate of domestic abuse in an area. So the variables that explain this were the rate of antisocial behaviour in an area, the proportion of BAME population, population density, and income score. So these are all variables I tested related to those theories I talked about earlier. And more details of the method and everything I used there is in the paper that I've published in Transactions in GIS. But rather than just talk about that paper, I wanted to move on to show how I moved on from the model to look at the neighbourhoods in a bit more detail. So what the model doesn't do is it doesn't account for neighbourhood effects, the sort of cause of those observed patterns. And Sampson suggests that the local community acts as an essential ingredient to social good. So that's what he calls collective efficacy. So what I wanted to do is to distinguish between the neighbourhoods that have higher or lower levels of domestic abuse despite their circumstances, with those that have higher or lower levels of abuse because of their circumstances. And I'll explain this a bit more now. So I used an app called Survey 123, which is part of the ArcGIS platform. And I visited 10 areas, 3 areas where the model under-predicted, 3 areas where it over-predicted, and 4 areas where it accurately predicted. And I visited the areas and I was shown around the area by a local stakeholder and collected information on the assets in that area. So the area was a size of about 1,500 people. And the key findings from this community asset mapping exercise were that there tended to be more services, sort of services suitable offered to people where they might be able to get some support with domestic abuse in areas that are homogeneously deprived. So these are there's 2 sort of names of 2 areas locally, but these are areas which are deprived, have similar sort of types of housing. Quite often people have lived there all of their lives in that area. But my question was, what do you do if you live in an affluent area where there's pockets of deprivation, where you need services, but they just aren't there because the funding doesn't basically go to these areas? And so one example was a place called Thaxted, which has, it's a picture, sort of postcard town, but it's still got areas of deprivation. But the types of services available were things like it had like a tennis club, but that's not much use to a victim. So in terms of collective efficacy and social capital, I found that areas that lacked this community spirits of collective efficacy tend to have different levels of reporting to those areas which had more of a community spirit. So places like, there's a town called Laindon, there was a higher level of people reporting to the police because I believe they had nowhere else to report, and they didn't have a sort of active community. And you've also got the influence of high residential mobility, so areas where there's a big turnover in population. They didn't seem to, they had different levels of reporting because people hadn't engaged with the community there. I also find that areas which had social capital, particularly high social capital, often also had particularly high human and economic capital as well. So how can you create collective efficacy in those areas that actually most need it? I found that the churches, community centres and food banks played a particularly important role, especially in deprived areas, in offering support, some more informal support to victims. And these organisations are actively referring to other agencies rather than the police. And it's these sort of places where the victims found they built up trust with people and were more likely to disclose. And there were often sort of more informal support available, like through counselling services, in coffee mornings and things like that. And I wouldn't have discovered this type of support had I not sort of conducted this community asset mapping exercise. So what I've done overall, I've come up with a sort of a model here to try and explain some of this. So basically, I found that if you can improve the built environment, so these types of, if you've got these unit or homogenous neighbourhoods, there tends to be an improved social environment and social relationship in those areas. This therefore increases collective efficacy and community cohesion, which I think leads to informal social control, acting as potentially as a capable guardian, which may in turn reduce the time to report domestic abuse, potentially reduce domestic abuse. Also, having increased collective efficacy and community cohesion decreases the acceptability of abusive behaviour, which might increase an individual's ability to escape domestic abuse, but also to increase reporting of domestic abuse, but possibly to a range of services. So it's really just showing the importance of the community.
Just wanted, I didn't want to interrupt, but the verbal 1 minute warning you asked for, I just wanted to give it to you.
Oh, thanks very much. That's perfect. We're coming on to the last slide now, so thank you. So finally, in conclusion, I've whistled through this and I'm happy to give more detail to anyone who's interested. But in terms of conclusions from the research, actually having a mixed method approach, so having a model and then a more qualitative community asset mapping using GIS has given new insights. So I'd say consider using a sort of a hybrid approach, which actually looks at the needs and strengths in a community as well. What I would like to do in future is to look at how to quantify collective efficacy. So actually I could put that into another model. The researchers really reiterated the need for a multi-agency approach, and you can't rely on police data alone. And the community asset model findings suggest that the model gives the original model gives a better estimation of abuse than just using police data. And I'd like to test the model in the future to try and look at implications for understanding the impact of COVID-19 on domestic abuse. So yeah, that's a quick 10 minutes. But if you've got any questions or want to follow anything up with me, there are my contact details there. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Our next panelist.
Let me stop there.
All right, is that working for everyone? Are the slides?
That
yeah,
looks great.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
They look beautiful.
Yes.
All right, well, good morning from Australia. It's 2 a.m. here, so I am a bit bleary, but let's crack on. So my name is Hayley Boxall. I am a research manager at the Australian Institute of Criminology in Canberra, which is Australia's capital. So today I want to talk to you about the findings from a survey we did, which looked at the prevalence of domestic violence amongst women during the initial stages of the COVID-19 pandemic. So it feels like a bit of a misnomer to say that the COVID-19 pandemic has had major implications for pretty much everyone. And that's even the case here in Australia, where we've had relatively low rates of infection and deaths related to this horrible illness. However, even before COVID reached our shores, which was about February when our first lockdown occurred, there were a number of domestic violence advocates who were raising the alarm about the potential implications of COVID-19 for domestic violence experiences amongst women living in the community. And as you can see from the slide behind me, there were a whole bunch of different articles saying kind of different things about what practitioners and police agencies were experiencing at the coalface. So we had some services in some locations saying they were experiencing a spike in reporting and also an increase in the complexity of cases. But then we also had a number of police agencies reporting a stabilizing trend of physical assaults being reported. So they were saying they weren't seeing any increase. Service providers saying they were seeing an increase. And more broadly, though, there was a general dissatisfaction with the ability of reported crime data, which is what Ruth was kind of talking to, but particularly in the context of COVID-19, to really kind of tell us what was happening in terms of domestic violence, because with COVID, we had an expectation that it would have implications for the ability of people to report what was actually happening for them. So to really get an understanding of what was happening in the community, what we decided to do was administer a survey, which was administered to 15,000 women who were recruited through online research panels. So these women were asked questions about their experiences of violence and abuse, help seeking financial stress and social isolation in the previous 3-month period. So it really covered the initial stages of the COVID-19 pandemic in Australia, which was about February to May 2020. We provide a huge amount of information about how we kind of did this, in particular, how we protected the safety of women, and all of this information is freely available on the Australian Institute of Criminology's website. So for those who are methodologically data nerdy kind of inclined, then I would encourage you to go have a bit of a look at what we kind of included there. So to be involved in the study, women had to be part of online research panels that were managed by a subcontractor called iLink Research Services. They had to be over the age of 18, and they also had to self-identify as female. So the definition of domestic violence we used was purposefully very broad. So included physical and non-physical forms of domestic violence. Just to note that coercive control for the purpose of this study was defined as the presence of 3 or more forms of non-physical behaviours. So these things like interfering with women's relationships, belittling, humiliating behaviours, restricting access to household amenities and things like that. So this included current and cohabiting, former cohabiting partners, and included attempted behaviours and threats. So the sample was recruited using proportion-based quota sampling. So it would reflect the spread of Australian women living in the community. So as you can kind of see, the tiny little dot down the side, the 1.7, that's the Australian, that's where I live, the Australian Capital Territory. So not many women, I guess as a proportion kind of live here, but so the rest of the kind of population, the sample reflected the spread of the population, but not only just in terms of numbers, but age, health status, Indigenous status, and a number of other kind of key factors. So what did we find? So during the initial stages of the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a high rate of reported domestic violence being experienced by women 18 years and over. So within the entire 15,000 samples, so this includes women who weren't actually in a relationship in the past 12 months, we found about 5% of women had experienced some form of physical or sexual violence. 1 in 10 experienced some form of emotionally abusive, harassing and controlling behaviours, while 5.8% had experienced some form of coercive control. And considering that we're only talking about a 3-month period, that's really concerning. And understandably, these rates increased when we limited the sample to women who said they had been in a relationship in the past 12 months. So women who were in a relationship, about 8% said they had experienced physical violence, 4% sexual violence, about 1 in 4 emotionally abusive, harassing and controlling behaviours, and about 1 in 10 experienced coercive control. So these rates are quite staggering. And I just wanted to draw your attention to a couple of key kind of types of domestic violence that are being experienced, particularly because these risk factors have been identified as correlated with intimate partner homicide. So 1.9% of women were strangled, choked or grabbed around the neck. And we know from the research done by Glass that women experiencing non-fatal strangulation are 7 times more likely to be murdered by their partner. 1.6% were hit with a weapon, beaten, stabbed or shot at with a gun. And 2.6% of women were stalked online or in person. 2.7% of women said the partner had threatened to hurt themselves, and partners' attempts or threats to harm themselves is also a very strong predictor of intimate partner homicide. So even though I've kind of talked about discrete forms of domestic violence among women who said they had experienced any form of physical or non-physical violence. Co-occurrence or complex forms of domestic violence is also very common. So 1 in 2 said they had experienced physical or sexual and coercive controlling behaviours. So the biggest statistic that I think is so shocking from our study is that of the women who said they had experienced any form of domestic violence in the last 3 months, 2 out of 3 of those women reported that the violence had either started for the first time or had escalated in severity or frequency in the last 3 months. So what this really kind of tells us is that the COVID-19 pandemic coincided with the start of abusive behaviours in previously non-abusive relationships and was associated with an increase in violence within previously violent relationships. So what we can kind of see here is that 1/3 of women who experience physical or sexual violence said that this was the first time it had happened within their relationship. And the same was reported for women who are experiencing coercive control. So 1 in 5 women said that this was the first time that it had occurred. However, what you can see from this slide is that the continuation or persistence of pre-existing domestic violence behaviours was more common within the sample. And so for these women, what we did is we asked them whether over the last 3 months, relative to the 6-month period prior to COVID, they thought that the violence was getting worse. And what we can kind of see here is that for the majority of women who said they had experienced historical domestic violence, the violence was getting more frequent and more severe during the initial stages of the COVID-19 pandemic. So this was 53% of women experiencing physical or sexual violence and 47% of women experiencing coercive control. So, I mean, that was a very brief rundown on what we have found. We have been producing a number of other reports based on this survey. So we've just released some work which looks at the role of social isolation, time spent at home, and financial stress in experiences of domestic violence. And we're about to release some work looking at who is most likely to experience domestic violence in times of COVID. But I think that this really just highlights that even in relatively privileged jurisdictions where COVID hasn't necessarily had as big an impact because of, rolling lockdowns and things like that, although Melbourne is obviously a case in point that this isn't over. They've only just come out of lockdown periods. But during COVID, the number of women who are experiencing domestic violence in the community is staggering, and they're experiencing complex and severe forms of domestic violence in conditions where they're less likely to be able to actually seek help. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much. Next panelist.
Hi, can you see my slide okay?
No.
Okay, let me try one other thing. Can you see that one okay?
Yeah, I would just start it. Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
Great. Sorry about that. My name is Karin Schmerler, and I'm a program coordinator at the San Diego County District Attorney's Office. Been working on a project to try to reduce repeat domestic violence through text messaging. And when COVID hit, we thought we should probably survey the victims we've been working with to find out how they're doing under the lockdowns. So why do a COVID text survey? We wanted to know right away how people were doing about 2 months into the lockdowns. We sent our text survey out in mid-May of 2020. And the moment I pressed send, the responses started rolling in. We got most of our responses within the first day, 90% or so. And we really wanted to know how victims were doing right in that moment. Not have to have them recall later how they were doing about 2 months into the lockdown. For our purposes, text surveys were better than email surveys because our target group is millennials, people under 40 for the most part. They have their phone with them all the time, and they look at research shows they read their text within 3 minutes of receiving them. Whereas email surveys, they tend to sit a little while, but most importantly, only 30% are opened when they're from a government agency. So you're going to get a lower open rate for those. We also wanted to learn firsthand how prior DV victims were doing, because as Hayley talked about, the sense in the media in particular was that victims were being very negatively affected by the COVID lockdowns. And locally, our police response, our reports were about the same. We didn't see a huge increase or even much at all. And so we wanted to ask victims themselves how they were doing and not rely on sort of proxy measures about how they were. Finally, it was a great opportunity for our prosecutor to be able to connect directly with victims during the lockdown. This text was an immediate connection. We offered services, customized, personalized follow-up from victim advocates, and connected them with resources. So we hope to reduce the isolation they might have been feeling during that time. So who were these victims that we surveyed by text? Very different group from the folks that the Australian team studied. These people that we surveyed were victims of DV crimes before the lockdown. The 6-month period before, in the United States, everyone had stay-at-home orders, which started in March, mid-March of 2020. So these were victims of crime prior to that, the 6 months before that. These crime victims were victims of crime that had occurred in northern San Diego County, one section of the county. They all had to have a phone number in their police report. They had to be textable. And 95% of the victims did have a phone number in their police report. So that wasn't a big knockout factor. And then finally, the police had to have sent the crime report to our office, the district attorney's office, for review, because we needed to have them as our sample. We saw them come through the office. Not all were prosecuted, but an attorney did review the case to see whether the elements of the crime were there. So we sent out this specific text that you see on your screen, Dear Ms. Schmerler. It was short and sweet. The goal was to get people to respond, and the research says the shorter the better. There were 2 blue links for English and Spanish versions of the survey, and when a victim clicked on the link, it took them to the 6-question survey in SurveyMonkey. This one that you see here was just like a general warm-up question. We sent out more than 1,200 texts, and we got a 16% response rate, which I think is comparable to prior research with DV victims. One of the things we found from the survey was that the majority of victims did not live with their partner at the time of the survey. And some of those folks might have moved out of their home after the DV crime had occurred prior to COVID. But we also have found a lot of DV occurs between people who don't live together. They're just dating. They might live together some of the time. We also found that about half of the victims did not have kids under 18 living with them at the time. We were afraid that could be a stressor and affect their sense of safety and needs during COVID. And about 1/3 had basically lost their job because of COVID. We asked the main question in our survey that got at whether the victims were doing worse or better under the lockdowns was whether, we asked them that directly in a very neutral way. And we were surprised in some ways to find that 90% of the respondents said they were doing better or the same during the COVID lockdowns in terms of the DV situation in their household. There was a group of 13% that said they were doing worse. We were very concerned about that group. We had a secondary question that asked, is there anything we could do right now that could help you stay safe? And again, 87% said, nope, I feel safe. But that same group of 13% said, yeah, there's some things I need that could help me stay safe. And typically what they needed were help with the criminal justice system, things like getting a restraining order during COVID, which was more challenging in some respects, or they needed assistance with financial resources, housing, etc. For those folks that said, yes, I need help with something, there was a follow-up question that said, could we have a victim advocate call you? And if they said yes, they were asked to leave their phone number and their name and the best time to call. And 10% of the victims did ask for a victim advocate follow-up, so we were able to connect with them. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we did a crosstab on those that were cohabiting and whether their DV situation was better or not. And we got a different result from Australia. We found that those who were cohabitating were actually more likely to say that they were doing better during the lockdown, which is counterintuitive. It could be that we have a very different victim group from other studies. These are folks who have been in the criminal justice system, prior victims of DV crime, but they're also a higher risk group because they've had DV in their past. So we're not sure what to make of it. Basically, we were relieved as an office that there was a smaller group of victims that were not doing as well, but that most of them were doing as well or better under the COVID lockdowns. And we just were glad we had an opportunity to reach out and connect with those folks. So this is my contact information. If anyone has any questions or would like to follow up, please feel free to do that.
Great, thank you. So we already have a few questions, which is awesome. So the first question is in the chat and it's for Ruth. Was Ruth able to look at differences between neighborhood factors that predict different types of domestic violence? Some research has shown that coercive controlling behaviors is more likely among affluent suburbs.
That's a really good question. At the moment, the model is just it looks at all all domestic abuse rate, but that is a really good point, and I think that I want to develop and test a model elsewhere. So that is something I really should consider. So I'm going to write this down now. But yeah, definitely, thank you for that.
Great. So next question: did any one of you find out if spurious factors such as lack of financial hardship during COVID played a part in the domestic violence increase?
Well, I'll answer that one in the first instance. So we actually just released some work which looked at the role of financial stress in experiences of domestic violence. So this was a self-assessed score based on like how financially stressed have you been over the last 3 months on a scale of 1, which is no stress, 5 to extreme levels of stress. And we also asked about financial stress prior to the COVID period. So how financially stressed were you for the 6-month period prior to that point? And we also asked about job loss. So we had 2 measures of financial stress. So what we found is that at least when you're looking at physical and sexual violence, the higher the level of financial stress that you experienced in the last 3 months, the more likely you were to experience domestic violence. But also crucially, because this isn't an objective measure of economic hardship, it could be that you're a small business owner who's relatively affluent, but because of COVID lockdowns means that your businesses are no longer able to function as they were previously. So even though you're economically quite secure, you're still experiencing more financial stress. So we still were able to kind of capture those. And what we found is that when you're looking at different patterns of domestic violence, so anyone who reported they had experienced an increase in financial stress during the COVID-19 period were more likely to experience the onset of domestic violence. So this is first time domestic abuse within their relationships. But interestingly, what we found is that job loss was actually associated with the escalation of previous domestic violence behaviours. So what we're kind of seeing is that financial stress does have a role to play in understanding domestic violence in the context of COVID, but it depends on what measure you're looking at and the relevance of prior violence. And theoretically, it's quite interesting, but I won't go into it. But yeah, so that paper is on the AIC website. So yes, we have looked at that, and it was actually the strongest predictor in terms of those kind of dynamic risk factors for domestic violence.
Great. Would anyone else like to comment on that question? Okay, so I'll move on to the next. To Karin, so you texted all victims regardless of whether or not there was an active criminal file against their perpetrator, question mark. Were there some whose files had been closed?
Yes, we did text all the victims, regardless of whether there was an active criminal file, and some of those cases had likely been closed by the time we did this text survey.
Okay, next question. How did you truly know if the group stated they were safe was the actual victim answering the survey?
Yeah, that's a great question. We can't be certain of that. We sent the text to the phone number that the victim provided to the police in their police report. We can't be certain that they answered the survey, but we think it's more likely than not that they did.
Great, thank you. If anybody else has any questions, please ask them in the Q&A. And panelists, if you have questions for each other, we have, some time if you do.
I'm just being chatty Cathy, so may as well have a bit of a chat. So Karin, I loved the work that you guys were doing. So we're actually looking at options to develop an app that would basically kind of do the same thing that you were doing. So this is actually really a question, but I was wondering if I could just contact you after this, just to potentially pick your brains about the process.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's interesting. We used a really low-end online survey texting program to send these out. It was, pretty manual in some respects, but we've since invested in a high-end automated texting system that's going to enable us to do a lot more.
Because really interested to kind of hear about your experiences, because I mean, some of the things that we're starting to think about it's that whole question of victim safety in terms of if someone's monitoring their phone and things like that. So we were kind of like going, well, but I like the idea of a text because you can kind of hide it as something else. Like it can be a text from someone fairly innocuous. And with the app idea, it was a case that it would look like something really generic, like a period tracker or a shopping app or something like that. But it's really tricky. But I think the tech facilitated kind of research thing, especially something that we can just put on their phone as a text message, is a really good idea. So yeah, super interested in what you guys are doing.
Thanks, Hayley. One of the things, the question about whether it was really the victim that was answering the survey, when I think about the research that says that 90% of people read their text within 3 minutes, it would be the person who had their phone right when it was sent. So it's a little less likely that it sat on their phone and someone else picked it up and answered it, now that I think about it. We can never be certain, but same with email. The only thing that you could be certain about is with a phone survey that the voice is male or female. But one of the things that we found in San Diego is that a quarter of the victims are men. And so you can never be sure, you'd have to know, and some of the partnerships are same sex too. And so you'd have to have some kind of variable that only that victim would know to confirm that it was them.
Yeah, we were kind of thinking about using biometric kind of security so that so one of the things, because we had the same kind of question for the survey that we did, well, how do we know if it's actually a woman responding or if it's not just an abusive partner? So we had a whole bunch of kind of like screening pages that kind of ask questions designed to screen out men who were masquerading as women. But when it comes to kind of like the app, what we were thinking of is that you would open it up and it would look like a generic, like it would look like it was kind of supposed to be. So if it was an app, it would be like, the first page of a shopping app to kind of say, do this thing. And then before you get into the survey component of it, it would ask for a fingerprint and like a eyeball scan or something like that, kind of like the same way that most apps already do, but that's expensive. So yeah, it's kind of one of those things of using something like the software that you guys use could be a good pilot in terms of seeing whether or not people actually complete it. But it sounds like you guys got a really good completion rate of 16%, because that's about the same level of response that we got for our survey. So it's pretty comparable.
We have some questions coming in the chat. So the first one is, can 911 create a Zoom link for reporting crime, domestic violence, because recording is live?
So there are actually some apps that do that. So the Daisy app, and in Australia, we have a couple of apps that have that function where it's almost like a distress alarm, where if someone opens the app, it automatically starts recording and it contacts the police. But that's dependent on people actually having the app and being able to get to it, kind of thing.
Okay, next question. Do you have concerns, though, that good cybersecurity practice advocates not clicking on the links in text from unknown persons?
Yeah, I'm not unfortunately totally sure how to answer that. We had a logo from the San Diego County District Attorney's Office at the top of the text. I don't know if that helps to help it seem legitimate. One of the things that we're looking at for our future texting efforts is to insert automatically the case number and the date of the crime, so that the victim might be more assured that this was the same incident that happened to them. This isn't just like a phishing scam or something like that. But it's a really good point to raise, and I'll take that back.
Okay. And do you think that cohabiting individuals may be felt safer with the lockdowns because the perpetrator didn't use certain types of violence control, since they were always together, knowing what the victim was doing, who they were interacting with, etc.?
That's also a great question. And we're not sure. We haven't really tried to determine what was in the victims' heads or what was happening to them during, we just don't know. We'd have to kind of follow up on that. It was an odd finding. Now, it could be that, actually, I don't know. It's an open question, and it's something we really should look at.
Great. These are excellent questions. Some of the best on the panels I've hosted. We have one more. Has anyone looked at violence against children at home? Also a good question.
It is such a good question. It's really the missing piece. So we're starting to kind of see quite a lot of research popping up, looking like doing those kind of big surveys of women, but we haven't really been asking about the experiences of children, even though we know that during lockdowns, kids don't have contacts with school, and schools are protective factors and mandatory reporters and things like that. But not only that, because everyone's at home, they're more likely to be witnessing domestic violence. So we're about to start another survey like the one that we just did of 15,000 women, but this is for 10,000 women, but it's asking more questions. And we do include items asking about children witnessing domestic violence or children witnessing domestic violence, as well as being the target of domestic violence. So that will be in the field hopefully in February, but obviously that's a bit of a time away, but it's something that we're very mindful of, in particular because a lot of child protection agencies in Australia and internationally are reporting a decrease in reporting, and we're pretty sure that that's probably not actually what's happening, that we've solved child abuse, that COVID has solved child abuse. It's probably just a case of mandatory reporting is down.
Great. Any other questions or comments or anything? I'll just say this is a very important topic, and I'm really glad I was able to be your stream host. I learned a lot, so thank you so much. Someone said thank you, this was great. I agree. So if there aren't any more questions, we will go ahead and close out for this session. Thank you again to the panelists for sharing your awesome research. And if you're looking to attend the next session, I'm going to close this one out and you can re-click the link from the conference website. And thank you all, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you. Thanks for joining from all across the world.